pleasure to welcome Dr. Lori White to our Ingenious You community today.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I'm very excited about our conversation.
Now, our listeners like to know something about the leadership journey of our guests, and you have had a remarkable journey in higher education, leading to your current role as President of DePauw University. Can you tell us about some pivotal moments or influences that have shaped your journey?
I absolutely can. And let me start by saying I never imagined that I would one day be a college president. In my family, the PhD is the entry-level degree. My father has a PhD in clinical psychology. My sister has a PhD in geology. And I only say that because I think people would imagine that I would have been a very successful college student and known exactly what it is that I wanted to do with my life. That was not true. And so pivotal moment for me was when I graduated with my undergraduate degree from UC Berkeley, great academic institution and quite large. In fact, I probably should have gone to a small liberal arts college like DePauw, but growing up in California, I didn't have the same awareness as folks in the Midwest and the East have of our wonderful liberal arts colleges, although we do have a few in California. And it was my father, who was a professor at another university, who suggested to me that I get a job working in higher education on a college campus. I knew what faculty members did, but I had no idea that there was a whole set of other people who worked at the university, which I came later to understand were the student affairs professionals. So probably the first pivotal moment was my father suggesting to me that I think about a career in higher ed, which turned out to be a 40+ long career, working my way up, as you said, Melissa, the administrative ladder. So that was probably pivotal moment number one. Pivotal moment number two was when I graduated from undergraduate, I had a lack of what I would call academic self-confidence. I was not a great student as an undergraduate. And I also think I was feeling the family pressure to go back to school to get my PhD. And I resisted for many, many years. So pivotal decision number two was at the age of 33, when I had finally regained my self-confidence, largely because I had been successful working, I decided to quit my full-time job and become a full-time graduate student. And that was the best decision I ever made, to go back to school, receive my PhD, and then relaunch my career after 4 years as a graduate student. So that's probably number two. And I like to think in three. So pivotal number three was several people, when I had been a vice president for student affairs at 2 different institutions for a total of over 10 years, encouraged me to consider a college presidency, which was not something that I ever imagined. However, it was those mentors encouraging me to think beyond what I thought I was capable of doing, which ultimately led me to become the president of DePauw.
Those are so important. And, I'm really glad you shared your story about waiting a while before you started your doctoral studies. So many of our doctoral students at BayPath come to their journey later in life. Similarly, not necessarily seeing themselves as having the ability, perhaps, or the confidence to do it. And so it's so important for folks to see role models and to hear stories such as the one you've just shared. So,
and understand, as I tell my students every day, there is no direct path. Our lives are wonderfully circuitous, and over planning doesn't always land you where it is that you imagine you may want to go.
Amen. So you chose "And Still I Rise," inspired by the great Maya Angelou's poem, one of my favorites, actually, as your presidential inauguration theme. What's the backstory for this? And what does this tell us about how you show up as a leader, what's important to you, and maybe even your vision for DePauw?
Sure. I identify as African American, and my African American heritage is very important to me. And I also love to sing. And the reason that this is important is because I get my inspiration from old time Negro spirituals and gospel songs. And Still I Rise was a way for me to convey to my community a lot about me, about my culture, and about my vision for the university. And I wanted the university to see ourselves as an institution that, while we may have had some challenges, we are going to continue to rise above those. And that I hope, as the president of DePauw, I can be part of lifting up the entire university, our students, our staff, our faculty, and our alumni to an exciting future.
Indeed. Now, you have been quoted as saying that a college campus cannot have a climate that fosters freedom of expression without an equal commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Tell us more about that and what has shaped your perspective about this.
What has shaped my perspective is my wonderful childhood growing up in the very diverse community of San Francisco, California. In my neighborhood, I had kids and families from different racial, ethnic, religious, and ideological backgrounds. And Melissa, I thought the whole world was like my neighborhood in San Francisco. And it wasn't until I went off to college that I realized that not everybody had had the benefit of that wonderful diversity. And that diversity really helped me embrace that the world is full of wonderfully different people with different ideas that challenged me every day. And those relationships with my childhood friends, because they were based on mutual respect and trust, that meant that even if we got into vigorous disagreements about something, we were still friends afterwards. And so that's why I believe that a necessary condition in order for the wonderful values of freedom of expression to flow on college campuses, you must have those diverse perspectives. And more than that, each member of your diverse community must feel welcome, supported, and affirmed on campus. And when that happens, that's when I think you get the magic of all of the diverse ideas that we hope flow at a liberal arts college campus like DePauw.
Now, let me drill down a little bit more
Sure,
and talk about free speech.
sure.
Free speech, as you know, on college campuses is considered to be a fundamental value, and yet it can sometimes conflict with the goals of DEI, inclusivity, anti-racism. How does DePauw reconcile these sometimes competing interests, and what steps are you taking to ensure that all voices are heard and respected?
Such an important question. And I must start by also sharing my perspective on freedom of expression really was shaped as an undergraduate at UC Berkeley. I always tell people I probably have a free speech tattoo somewhere because I don't think you can go to a school like UC Berkeley and not understand the values of freedom of expression. And so when I speak with my students, because they were not alive during the free speech movement in the 1960s, I want them to understand that that was a movement that enabled young people to be able to use their voice to advocate against the war, to advocate for women's rights and civil rights. And so I want them to understand why freedom of expression is such a fundamentally important value, not only in college, but as part of our democracy. So I think it's really important for our students to have a historical perspective. So to your question about, yes, there is tension sometimes on college campuses between the values of freedom of expression and the equally important values of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I don't think that has to be. And so the way in which that works at DePauw, and we are not perfect, but here is what we strive to achieve through our values, is in our freedom of expression statement of values. There are two things that we say. One is we talk about the fact that freedom of expression is a fundamental part of a liberal arts education. And we also talk about diversity, equity, inclusion as a fundamental value to what it means to be a member of the DePauw community. And we say that you have the right, unless it is not allowed by law, to express yourself in all of the ways that we would expect someone engaged in a liberal arts college to do. And I'm going to use the colloquialism here. My mother would say, just because you can say something doesn't mean you always should.
Mm.
And so our community values ask people to think about the great responsibility that comes with the value of freedom of expression, and to think always about how it is that you may express yourself that may impact other members of the community.
Now, as the president, what role do you play in shaping a culture that both fosters freedom of expression and lives out the values of DEI? And how's it going? And any thoughts about actions that you have found to be most important or impactful?
Sure. It's important that I be a role model, for sure, as the president of DePauw. And it's also important early on that I talk with students about the university's values. One of the reasons I became so interested in freedom of expression on college campuses is I observed, when I was a vice president for student affairs, that we had these great expectations for the ways in which our students would comport themselves on campus. Yet here were 17 and 18-year-olds straight out of high school, and we hadn't given them the tools to actually engage in these challenging conversations, nor reinforced why these were such important values. So one of the things that I've done the last two orientations where I've had a chance to address the entire first year class is I talk about those values at DePauw. I talk about why they are important. And then we also spend time during our orientation program talking to students and giving them some of the tools to wrestle with these difficult, challenging conversations that may occur in class and in the residence halls. Now, you can't only do that once, of course, but I think it's important to start there. I also, you may or may not know, I was part of the Bipartisan Policy Commission's work to develop what we call the Freedom of Expression Roadmap. And that was a great experience. There were 15 or so of us representing all levels of the institution, as well as for a student who had recently graduated. And we talked about how is it that we can reinforce this message? Can we give folks some additional tools through case studies to wrestle with this, so that you've already talked about it as a campus community before an event may happen on your campus, and you've talked about ways in which you might respond. So those are some of the things that I have done, and the folks on my campus know that this is a really important value, not just to me personally, but again, what I feel is a fundamental aspect of our liberal arts education.
Yeah, what was your biggest learning from that experience? Was there anything that surprised you or something that has stuck with you?
I think what has stuck with me is that this work is hard and it's messy.
Yeah.
Yet it is really part of the democratic process. And I think if I could convey anything to those external to college campuses, is for them to understand that a college campus right now, Melissa, is one of the few places where we actually gather diverse folks together and ask them to figure out how to live, work, and learn together. Because sadly, very few of our neighborhoods now are anything like the neighborhood in which I grew up in San Francisco. And so most of us in the United States live in segregated communities, segregated by economics, segregated by race, segregated by ideology. And so a college campus, particularly a residential, small liberal arts college, is one of the very few places where we're bringing diverse individuals together and asking them, as I said, to wrestle with the messiness of what it means to live, work, and study in a diverse community.
Boy, that's
So
such
of course, it's not going to be easy.
yeah, that's such an important point. I'm really glad that you raised that, because it points to the value of the college experience for students, for the entire community. And sometimes I think that gets lost with all the criticism that's being thrown at higher education these days. So, yeah.
Yes, and I agree with that. I think certainly we obviously want students to be well prepared for careers. And, that is one of the reasons that young people and their parents want them to pursue a college education. I don't want to minimize the importance of that. And I think we have also forgotten to reinforce that part of what we're doing is preparing young people to be active citizens in our democracy. And so we want them to be exposed to the full range of ideas, to wrestle with them, to criticize them, to think about how it is they want to be a leader in their community once they graduate from our fine institutions.
I'm hearing your student affairs background come through there. So I'll come
Yes,
back
you are.
to that in a second. I want to ask you about the recent Senate hearings, the subsequent resignations of the presidents of the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard, and wondering if you would be willing to share your reflections on the current climate for women, particularly Black women in leadership within academe, first of all, and then follow up to that would be as the first woman, the first person of color to serve as president at DePauw, how you think about navigating these complexities.
That is the question of the day, Melissa. So let me start where I started our conversation, which is that I said I never imagined that I would one day be a college president. And it took mentors encouraging me to think beyond what I thought I might be capable of achieving in higher ed. And even as I progressed through the interview process for the DePauw presidency, I wasn't sure. And it took me being on the campus, seeing the room where we hang the portraits of all of the previous presidents, none of whom look like me. And when I got to that blank space where one day they will hang a portrait of me, and that in of itself kind of freaks me out, but one day there will be a portrait of me as the 21st president of DePauw. And when I saw that blank space, a voice from above literally said to me, Lori, they're going to offer you that job. And when they offer it to you, you're going to say yes. You're going to say yes, not for you. You're going to say yes because it's important for future generations of DePauw University to know that somebody who looks like you can be president of DePauw. And so I say that, Melissa, because I feel called to serve in this role. And I feel called to serve because it's not easy. It's not easy being the first woman. It's not easy being the first African-American. Yet when I walk on campus and I see women students come up to me and they said, we're fangirling, can we take a picture of you? When I hear from African-American alumni who were at DePauw when there were only one or two of them and who had such a tough time. In fact, one of my very good friends who was a friend before I became the president of DePauw did not have a great experience. She's African-American, and she said she would never come back. And then I became the president of DePauw. She came back and she says, oh my goodness, Lori, what changes have I seen since I graduated from the university? So I feel this great responsibility to serve in this particular way. There was an article in the New York Times, I think it was yesterday, that talked about the pressures on women and the pressures on people of color, because what I feel every day is if for some reason I am not successful, and I'm not putting that in the universe because I believe that I'm going to continue to be successful at DePauw, but if for some reason I am not, I feel the great burden that perhaps the powers that be would say, oh, we tried a woman, we tried an African-American, that didn't work, and so we're not going to do that again. So we feel this incredible pressure, not only to lead in the role as president, but also to lead as women and also to lead as folks of color. And so it breaks my heart to see what happened to my colleagues at that Senate hearing. You know, you wonder if it had been three men, if it had been a different dynamic, whether the outcome would have been the same. And, you know, none of us know that. But I feel badly that my colleagues, all of whom had been president less than 3 years or less, had to face what seemed to have been an ambush by the members of Congress and have destroyed the careers at least two of my three sister presidents, all of whom I know, who are great leaders, who are really smart people, and I'm really sorry to have seen them have to step down as a result of that hearing.
Well, it's a loss. It's a loss for their institutions, and it's a loss
Yes,
for the higher education community, I think. So,
yes.
um,
Yes.
now,
And we're
now,
imperfect humans. So, yes.
yeah.
So, all I would say is we're imperfect humans. And I don't want a Monday morning quarterback how I might have responded at the hearing. None of us know.
Mm,
All I would say is that we have to give leaders grace and understand that each of us does this work because we believe very deeply in our institutions, and we believe very deeply in providing an educational experience for our students. That's why we do this work.
mm. Now, given the challenges for women or women of color, what advice would you give to the next generation? So that next generation of diverse leaders coming up, looking at you, looking at others, thinking about whether they want to step forward and go down this path, and who may be feeling a bit discouraged at the moment. So what would you say to them?
I'd say a couple of things. One is you have to be driven by an important why.
Mm,
So when people call me and ask me about, well, what does it take to be a college president? I say to them, you cannot be driven by the title. If you're driven by the title and what you think the news press release will be when your name is announced as the 21st president of X university, then you're driven by the wrong thing. My why is because I want every single student to have a better undergraduate experience than I had. And then I want to make sure that every single student that we admit to DePauw has the opportunity to pursue their hopes and their dreams, whatever those are. The best part of my day, every day, Melissa, is when I can interact with a student. So when I get discouraged, when I think I'm not going to rise, in the words of Maya Angelou, it just takes that magic moment with a student who tells me that she is really excited about the thesis upon which she's working. Or a student tells me that he's graduated and has gotten into the graduate program of his dreams. Or an alum comes back and says, I was really struggling and I was wondering if I had made the right decision. And then a professor tapped me on the shoulder and says, you deserve to be here and I want to be your mentor. Those are the reasons that we do this work. So if you're driven by that why, then all of the other things, even though this is not easy work, will carry you through.
So I mentioned your experience in student affairs, and indeed you have a very, very extensive, deep background in student affairs that you bring with you to the role of the presidency, which I imagine gives you a very unique way of looking at the campus experience. I would imagine you're also paying close attention to the student experience at DePauw. So I want to give you a chance to tell our listeners a little bit more about DePauw, if you would, because we have listeners around the globe. So we may have some folks who may not be familiar with DePauw, not many, but there may be a few. And then I'd love to hear your thoughts about any new initiatives or programs on the radar designed to enrich the student experience, either in or out of the classroom.
Thank you so much for this question. I could probably talk for hours about DePauw University, though I know we do not have that much time. DePauw University was founded in 1837 as a historically United Methodist college. We are still affiliated with the United Methodist Church, though I would not classify ourselves as a religious or Christian college in what might be the traditional definition of that. We've always been a college that is open to all students, regardless of their faith background. We are a small liberal arts college, 1,800 students located close to Indianapolis in Greencastle, Indiana. We attract students from all over the country and the world. In fact, 30% of our first year class last year were international students. And people always are surprised at that because we're located in a small town of about 10,000 people. And folks wonder, how does an international student find out about DePauw? This goes to your question about the student experience, what has happened is we have created such a great experience for all of our students, particularly our international students, and they go back home to their home countries and encourage members of their community and their neighborhood to consider coming to DePauw. So that's the reason we have such a high population of international students. We're also known as one of the top 5 colleges that sends our students abroad. And in fact, we just finished our winter term. So between fall term and spring term, we have a 3, almost 4-week winter term. And there are a number of international trips. And I was just looking at the list. Students went to Peru, they went to Spain and Portugal, they went to Berlin. And so not only do we have international students coming to the university, we are also sending our students abroad all across the world, which is quite exciting. In terms of the student experience, a couple of things that we are known for. One is that while of course we are known for our academic experience, we're the #1 liberal arts college in the state of Indiana. We're ranked in the top 50 of liberal arts colleges in the country. We are also known for the strength of our outside of the classroom experience. And in fact, as a matter of fact, the last 2 CEOs of General Mills, the current CEO of General Mills and the previous CEO of General Mills, are DePauw graduates. And the reason that I bring this up now in response to your question about the outside of the classroom experience is the former CEO of General Mills, a person by the name of Steve Sanger. He got his undergraduate degree from DePauw, received his MBA from the University of Michigan. And he said when he went for job interviews, they would want to know what he learned in his MBA program about leadership. And he said, wait a second, hang on. He said, what I learned about leadership, I learned as an undergraduate student at DePauw. He said, I was a leader in my fraternity. He said, I learned how to manage resources and manage my peers. He said, I was in charge of campus concerts on campus and had to negotiate contracts and negotiate from the list of artists, which ones I would choose. And he went on just to talk about all of the things he learned outside of the classroom as a result of his experiences at DePauw. So our tagline is creating leaders that the world needs. And if you spoke with our alumni, what they would say to you is, I got a great academic education and all of the skills that I have learned to be successful in my career, many of them I learned in my outside of the classroom experiences. We are also leaning in to being a 21st century liberal arts college. And what I mean by that is, if I was to ask a 17 or 18-year-old, describe what you think the liberal arts is or what a liberal arts experience is, most of them probably would not be able to define that. In fact, some of them, I laugh, they think liberal means everybody is a Democrat, and they think arts means that I'm going to teach you how to be successful in the arts and crafts, not understanding that liberal arts is really the study of the human condition, and that we want to make sure that students have good critical thinking skills, good communication skills, the ability to work in diverse groups, and are exposed to the wide range of fields from humanities and literature and philosophy. And it's also important to students and parents that, as I said earlier, that their degree leads them to successful employment. So our new strategic plan, DePauw Bold and Goal 2027, the first pillar of our strategic plan is academic renewal. And we want to make sure that our curriculum speaks to students of the 21st century, prepares them for jobs of today and the jobs that we can't even imagine for tomorrow. We are establishing, this is the bold part, we are establishing 2 new academic schools. One we established this fall, so it has recently opened, our new School of Business and Leadership. And the next new school will open next fall, our Creative School. So our center of DePauw will always be our College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. And for those students who also want a focus on business, they'll have the opportunity to combine that with their liberal arts education. And those students who are interested in all of the creative juices that flow through young people now, because they're all entrepreneurs and influencers and using all of those creative tools to, I would say, create the world of the 21st century. We also will appeal to those students as well.
You know, when you walk around the campus with your student affairs hat on, are there 2 or 3 things that are always top of mind for you that you know are critically important to a robust, to a healthy, to a positive student experience? Things that you look for?
Things that I look for, particularly coming out of the pandemic, are students gathering.
Yeah.
Gathering informally in the dining hall, on the grass, in the residence halls. I think those are the ways in which we build community on campus. We spent 2 years on Zoom behind our computers. And so working with this generation of students to actually come out, come out of their rooms, get off of their computers, get off of their phone, that to me signals what I would think is a vibrant, healthy campus. That's important. Number 2 is making sure that we have strong mental health services. That was something, of course, we needed even before the pandemic. And again, post-pandemic, that's even more important with this generation. So we received a grant from the Lilly Endowment, organization that has been really generous to higher ed in general, and particularly to higher ed institutions here in the state of Indiana. So we are involved in a collaborative with 2 other universities in our region to join forces so that we can offer a fuller complement of mental health services that individually our campuses may not be able to afford, but joining together in a consortium, we can deliver a higher quality of service to our students. So I think that that's really important. So I look for that as a former student affairs professional. And I also want to make sure that students are just feeling great about their experience. I always tell students, I'm the president of fun, good fun, but I want to make sure that when students leave DePauw, they look back upon their experiences here and say, I had a great time. I really had a great time.
So the DePauw board has just extended your contract through 2028. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Now, as you know, it's one thing to be a first-time, first-term president, but you're now entering a new phase, aren't you, as a seasoned president? So how has your leadership evolved during your first term? Biggest surprises or aha moments? And then
Yes.
I've got a second part to that question, but let's start with that.
Sure. Well, I'm honored, humbled, and excited to be able to continue as the president of DePauw through 27, 28. And aha surprises. The first was when I accepted the job as president of DePauw. A week later, the world turned upside down. And so I'm a COVID president. So my first big surprise was that instead of what would have been the typical first year as a new president, where I go out on the road and I have the chance to introduce myself personally to alumni and to friends of the university, I had to figure out a way to do that behind a Zoom screen. So the first surprise was, as a leader, one who I think one of my greatest strengths is my ability to connect well with others. How was I going to translate that through a Zoom screen? And moreover, how was I going to introduce myself to a new community? And so had to use all of the creative tools that we had available to us to try to be a first-year president in a pandemic on a Zoom screen. So that was my very first surprise, that my first year was going to be quite different than I imagined. My second was how wonderfully warm the welcome I received from our campus and from our alumni, even given the set of challenging circumstances, and that we were able to, in a wonderfully collaborative way, establish and launch what I think is a really exciting, bold, and gold strategic plan for the university. And again, as a first-year president who did not have the strength of previous relationships because I was new to the community. The wonderful surprise was how well people responded to my leadership and their willingness to work collaboratively to deliver what I think is a really exciting strategic plan. And then the third, and I tell people this all of the time, I had always been at big schools, many of them with Division I athletic programs with a lot of rah-rah spirit, particularly amongst the alumni. I did not expect to find the same here at DePauw. Our alumni are incredible. They love this place. They are supportive of DePauw, both monetarily and otherwise. When we have our big football game against our arch rivals, Wabash, we've got to spend extra money to bring in extra stands because everybody wants to come to the game. And so that was just a wonderfully pleasant surprise. I did not expect to have that incredible enthusiasm in our alumni base for our small liberal arts college in Greencastle, Indiana. So those are three of my surprises.
Those are great. And yes, the passion that flows deep among alums of smaller, mission-centric colleges is quite extraordinary, isn't it? So
It really is. It really is. And probably the fourth one, even though I always think in threes, I have to add this fourth one, is that the success of our alumni, and I know all presidents will say that, and I just tell people, go to our wiki page and see the folks that have graduated from DePauw, from Vernon Jordan to Dan Quayle to the folks I said who were the CEOs of General Mills to general manager of the New York Giants to the president of the Boston Celtics to Barbara Kingsolver, just on and on and on. These are all DePauw alums.
Yeah. So now as you are looking to your next era as president, what's top of mind for you? And what are your most ambitious, big hopes and dreams for the school?
So my ambitious and then my audacious big hopes and dreams. So ambitions are that we successfully implement our Bold and Gold 2027 strategic plan, starting with the establishment of the two new academic schools that I've already mentioned. And there are other parts of our strategic plan related to an exemplary student experience, a focus on institutional equity, and to be a flourishing university. Flourishing university means that we steward the resources with which we have been entrusted by our alums and friends of DePauw who have invested in the university, in our day-to-day operations, as well as in our endowment. And so that is really important. As one of my presidential role models said to me, Melissa, the toughest part about being a president are the decisions not that you make for today of the university, it's the decisions that you make for the tomorrow. And so my audacious goal is that our endowment is over $1 billion by the time I retire from DePauw in 27, 28. We're about at 800 million. And the reason that the $1 billion plus mark is so important is that will enable us to be seen and talked about in the same conversation as the top 20 liberal arts colleges and enable us to do more to provide scholarship support for those students who desire a DePauw education. So that is also very important to me. And I want to continue to hold it down as the #1 liberal arts college in the state of Indiana. And I am very competitive and we are ranked number 46, which is great. I would love to be ranked in the top 25 by the time I retire from DePauw.
Those are great goals. Now, with such big goals, it's important you take care of yourself as a leader. And I know you've talked about the importance of personal growth and reflection in your life. So how do you incorporate those principles into the daily routine of a very, very busy presidency and other things that are important that you have found important for staying positive and resilient?
I love to sing. And so every morning I turn on my phone and I turn it on to one of my favorite gospel songs. and that is my morning meditation devotional. And depending on my mood will depend on what song. So this morning I was listening to Oh Happy Day by the Edwin Hawkins Singers, which is a great song of uplift. So I try to do that a little bit every morning. I love sports, so I spent the weekend watching pro football on Sunday. And my San Francisco 49ers are going to be in the Super Bowl. And so I love watching college football, and I probably get out my aggressions by yelling at the TV. And so that is a favorite pastime of mine. My husband and I love to travel. One of my very good friends is having a small, intimate wedding in Hawaii. And so I am going to, for 4 days, one going over and one going back, going to go to her wedding, because as I've said to folks, always friends and family are important, and we should never let work get in the way of us spending time with friends and family. So even though it's crazy that I'm going to take only 4 days to go to Hawaii, I'm going to do that. And then spending time with family and friends whenever it is that I can, leaning on my mentors. Wouldn't be here without them, and wouldn't stay in this job in a healthy way without my mentors and what I call my sister president. So I'm leaning on those folks also.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for that. So we have a signature question that we end every interview with. So, Lori, here is the question for you. If you could leave one transformative idea or piece of advice that would shape the future of higher education, what would it be and why?
My signature piece of advice would be, higher education still remains one of the most transformative experiences that a young person can have. My family is evidence of that. My father was the first African-American to receive a PhD in clinical psychology from Michigan State University in the early 1960s. And because he received that degree, that changed the trajectory of my life. And I, in turn, I hope, am changing the trajectory of the lives of the students that I have the blessing to work with every day. And so my piece of advice would be for us not to forget about the transformative power of higher education, even in the midst of all of the drama that is going on right now.
Timely and a much, much needed message for all of us to hear today. So thank you so much for the conversation. I am
Thank you,
inspired,
Melissa.
even though you didn't sing for me, I am inspired by your words and by your obvious wisdom. So DePauw is very, very fortunate to have you in this role, and I wish you all good things
Thank
in your
you.
second era of your presidency.
Thank you so much. Well, then let's see. Now I'll have to end with a song. How about "It Is Well, It Is Well with My Soul"? It's the best I can do without warming up.
And one of my favorites. So thank you for that.
You are